Hi again. Thank you very much for having me here. Thank you to Professor Sung-Yoon Cho for having me here and for accepting. Actually, I contacted Professor Cho saying that I'm coming to Korea and I'd love to talk to Korean students about translation. So I'm really happy that she accepted. And I've come to this university. I just learned that other professors before me have come here and talked to you or to the students before you. So I'm really honored to be in that line, honored to be here. So thank you very much. Just to say a couple of things about myself and basically where I come from. So my name is Dionysios Kapsaskis, as you just heard, and I teach audiovisual translation and the other topics just mentioned. I am the course leader of a master's in audiovisual translation at Roehampton University in London. Our master's there is maybe the first or the second ever created in audiovisual translation. I hear that maybe most of you are students in translation anyway in the room, so you know what I'm talking about when I say translation, audiovisual translation. So it's really very nice for me to be talking to people who, we speak the same language in a way. When I was in discussion with Professor Cho about what I will be talking to you today, it was kind of a little bit difficult for me to decide because I don't know your program, I don't know you as students, but I thought I would look at audiovisual translation and also promotional texts from a perspective which is not uncommon, but it takes a very specific look, so interculturality, so intercultural communication, and how we look at audiovisual translation and how we look at promotional texts like advertisements from that very specific angle, which is intercultural communication. These days, it's kind of a very special time for translation and another disciplines as well, because of this new development in technology, which is artificial intelligence. So we know that this is going to replace a lot of the work that we are doing as human translators. It's almost a reality in like big languages, so-called big languages, like between English and Spanish or between English and French. Indeed, if you use not even AI, you can use Google Translate and you'll get a decent translation on the other side in a matter of seconds. So it's indeed a problem for our professional prospects. There is no doubt about that. But at the same time, we who are a little bit older teachers and have been teaching translation for years and years and translating ourselves, we know that there are certain things that the computer will find it always very difficult to do. I mean, I know that technology is progressing so fast, but still, it's difficult for a computer to truly understand, for instance, intercultural relationships or the subtleties that are there in when different cultures meet. It's very difficult for a computer or for a software, frankly, or for an algorithm to have a kind of a confident understanding of what is cultural difference and what is appropriate to write or to say at any specific moment. So I'm saying that because whereas translation competence per se might be something that, yes, a software will be probably able to work well with, this particular thing that we humans are better at, which is intercultural competence, and other things like creativity, we still do much better than a computer. And so that's why I decided today to focus on a topic that is, something that is going on to continue to exist in the years to come, intercultural competence and creativity are issues that it'll take technology quite a few years to catch up. So intercultural communication in the translation of audiovisual promotional text at Roehampton. I teach I teach translation theory, but I've been teaching subtitling for many, many years. And also I teach transcreation. Does anyone know what transcreation is? I can see many nods in the room. So transcreation really is, in a way, the translation of promotional texts like advertisement. Yeah, but when you actually change the advertisement. So let's say there is a new model of, Kia cars, and you want to advertise it in India, which is a big market, you will advertise it very differently from, how you do it in this country. And if you want to advertise it in Australia, again, it's not only a question of, a different type of model. It's a question of, what kind of cultural stereotypes they have. Are they acceptable? Well, let me give you a simple example. Are they acceptable? Are they accepting easily a female driver? The answer is not obvious to everyone. So yeah, so this is the kind of thing that the machine will not be able to understand easily. But I'm going ahead of myself. Let's see what I'm going to talk about to you today. It's going to be an hour talk, and I've prepared, I think, for a bit more than an hour, but I don't need to say everything that I've prepared. I can skip some slides if necessary. That's absolutely fine. So intercultural communication and translation, cultural values and dimensions, translating advertising copy, and AVT subtitling Chiken Run. So the two first bullets will be a little bit of theory. So just talking to you, well, as I started already, about intercultural communication and translation, not too much theory, I was warned, because it's a time of the year where everybody's very tired. We don't want more theory at this point. But anyway, I'm just going to give you some theory. I don't really need you to understand everything. Maybe, you'll find a concept there and you'll ask me a question at the end, or maybe not. Maybe you just say, this doesn't interest me. So, doesn't matter really at all. Just, we can at the end discuss it or not. It's really up to you. The second topic here, cultural values and dimensions, is something that we don't teach very much in translation studies. It's really relationships between different cultures. It's mostly anthropology, but it's very much used in advertising, advertising studies when you learn advertising. So I'm going to discuss how we look at intercultural relationships in the context of advertising. What kind of, this will be really about questions like, what kind of people Korean people are? What is the difference between Korean people and the French people, for instance? It's all very much stereotypes, I'm telling you already. So none of this truly exists, but it's about perceptions. So how are Korean people perceived? How do they perceive themselves? I'm not going to tell you that, but I'm going to tell you discussions around thinking about that topic. And the last part of my lecture today will be really applying a little bit of that knowledge to translating advertising copy. We'll look at some transcreation work and subtitling. The excerpt I've chosen for you is from this animation film, which probably when you were kids, you've seen with your mom and dad, called Chiken Run. Okay, I'll talk about that later. So let's go with a little bit of theory first. Intercultural communication. This is Juliane Haus, which is a scholar, a German scholar, I think, and she's looked into intercultural communication and translation. She says it can be very simply characterized as communication between members of different cultures who presumably follow different sociocultural rules for behavior. Now, I find this interesting because that's what it says here. Different culture, it follows different rules for behavior. Yeah, so in my English university, when someone comes, you just handshake. Here, you just nod rather, or both. So it's different behavior. So that's really the tip of the iceberg. There are deep, as you go down, you can see deep differences in the way we feel about our life, about culture, about various layers of culture in society. So we follow different sociocultural rules. And that applies within countries, between groups such as linguistic minorities, for instance. So what I teach in the UK, there are very many different linguistic minorities. So intercultural relationships, even where I live in London, that is very pronounced, that is very clear. There is London professional people, there is people who live in London like myself and are professional. In my neighborhood in London, there are people who are bus drivers. We have many Jamaican bus drivers there, and we have many Portuguese people of the Portuguese community. So different cultures in the same little neighborhood in London. So a lot of intercultural communication takes place where I live. I suppose it's the same in a big city like Seoul. You have also different groups of people living together, and between groups that have differing rules for speaking, determined by social class, age, gender. So let's say my age group, maybe together with your professor, is different from the majority of you who are very young people. You have a different cultural standards between you, and which are defined by age, by gender, and the rest. And so also intercultural communication takes place across different countries through the flow of text and cultural artifacts, and transnational and global, on a transnational and global scale, just to be a bit more theoretical. This means very simply that, you know, I'm a visitor in this country, so I don't know the rules of this country. So there is a lot of, let's say, bumps, cultural bumps, when I am in the middle of or I go to a shop in Seoul and I want to, you know, ask someone something. It's the barrier is not only linguistic, is also cultural. How do you approach someone? What do you say? You know, when it's the time to say thank you, when it's the time to say sorry. So that's really what it says here. Intercultural communication takes place between different people within the same country, between countries. And the issue with intercultural communication is that it affects translation very much. If I give you now a theorization of intercultural communication that comes from Edward Hall, and what it says there at the bottom, the Edward Hall's triad of culture. So this is really, imagine this as an iceberg. That's really what he's asking us to do, Edward Hall. And he says, culture is like an iceberg. I know this is a bit theoretical again, but it doesn't matter. You know, I'm going to just go and say a few things about the iceberg of culture. And then I think it's useful for you to remember that people have said, like Edward Hall, there are 3 layers. There is the top layer of culture, there is the middle layer of culture, and there is a deep layer of culture, which is the bottom one, which says they're informal. As you can see, the technical, formal, and informal. These are a bit confusing words, technical, formal, and informal. You can in your mind think it's superficial, like an iceberg. We can see the tip of the iceberg in culture. Then there is something which is just above the water. So things that are very clearly seen, right? And then there is a lot that is at the bottom of the iceberg that is very, very deep. And actually most of culture, as you can see in this model, we can't really see it, but it's fundamental there. So in Edward Hall's model of the triad of culture as an iceberg, what we can see is things like music, art, food and drink, dress, architecture, institutions, geography, and visible behavior. You go to another country, you see all that. You look at music generally, and immediately you can see, oh, this is Korean music, this is K-pop. Or you go somewhere else, this is classical music, Baroque in, you know, in Europe or whatever. You look someone the way they are dressed, immediately you can say many things about them. You know, if they are young, if they are older, if they are old, but they like to look like they're younger, if they are young, but they are very conservative, if they look like your taste or not. So all this is visible cultural behavior, and it's really the tip of the iceberg, okay? And then there is a layer just below that, kind of visible, but below the surface. And these are things that we don't talk about, but they are also important in culture, like what is formal, what is the ritual. When I sit at a table, nobody's going to tell me you need to, you know, eat in this particular, you need to wait for the food to be served for you to start eating. This is cultural behavior. Nobody's going to say it, but it is there. So here they say appropriacy, what is normal, rituals, customs, traditions, ways and styles of behavior, blah, blah, blah. So this is really the layer of culture that is just under the water, the layer of the iceberg that is just under the water. It's the formalities of life. But then look at the deeper part of culture, which is the most fundamental, which is the most crucial, which everything boils down to. And this is issues of action, communication, environment, how we perceive of time, how we perceive of space. These are abstract things, okay? So we don't need to go into a lot of discussion here, although actually I will go into a little bit more depth in issues like individualism, power, competitiveness, structural thinking, things just to put it in different terms, the difference, let's say there are cultures which value very much seniority in age, seniority in the structure of a company, who is above, who is below. That exists everywhere, but how you perceive that difference is not the same. So I am Greek myself. So when I went to Britain to study, I started talking to my professors like Mr. Brown, Mr. Matthews, Mrs. Basnet, and soon they started telling me to call them John and Susan. And I was like, I can't call my professor John. He's not John to me. No, John is my pal. So, but that actually reflects that in that country, there is not such big difference. They don't want that difference to be there. They think of that difference as counterproductive. There is still a lot of difference. Yeah, I can't start swearing in front of my professor, right? That still is not acceptable. However, like, I could actually, with my pal, I could say anything. But in Britain, they say, okay, don't do that, okay? But it's kind of your equal, your professor. Only he's, more wise. He's wiser, or she's wiser. They are older, but they are kind of your equal. So you're John, and this is Dionysios. So to me now, it takes a lot of effort to tell the same to my Italian students or to my Greek students when they come and say, please call me Dionysios. And then they say, no, and they cringe. No, I don't want to do that. No, you're not Dionysios. Anyway, I'm older now, so. So these are important things. How do you consider gender, as I said before? So when I say this, just to say about gender also, so it's about, perceptions, like traditional perceptions of gender, traditional hierarchies of gender, obviously, which are very much shared in 99% of the world. So the traditional, primacy of the male gender over the female gender. But these days, obviously, we are beyond that. We are beyond that question. So these days, we cannot make assumptions about gender anyway. There is a decline of how we consider gender, and these are things that we need to take into account, and they are different from culture to culture. Just to give you an example, because I know a bit abstract, until recently, in English writing, we could write a theoretical text about the translator, okay? And then we say the translator needs to decide whether they are going to use a verb or a noun in this translation. And then you continue he needs to decide this and that. And there I stop my students and I say, look at the room. How many male people are in the room? How many female people are in the room? So we normally see in a translation room 90% girls and 10% boys. So why is it translator and then it is he? Okay, why do we make that assumption? So the question for us translator is, if I translate that, so in English now we use they, yeah? So the translator needs to decide whether it will be a noun or a verb. They need to make clear whether we will do this and that. So that is the cultural perception these days in the UK, although this is kind of recent. This is over the past 10, 15 years that has changed. When I studied translation in the 90s, it was still the translator, he. My Greek and Italian students, they say, they come from their own universities. I teach in a master's, so they come with a degree. And they say still the translator, right, he. So I try to change that to them, but for them it's difficult because when they go back to their country, that's what it's expected from them. To go back and say the translator and then he, okay? So this is really at the very bottom of the iceberg, that kind of perception. What is your image of, you know, of a, well, let's say a translator, of a doctor, of a, and then again, you can turn it down. What is your image of a nurse? A lot of the people say the nurse and then she. So all of these things are aspects that you need to keep in mind when we think of culture and translation, intercultural communication and translation. David Katan, from whom I take this, he has written an excellent book on translation and culture, and he has said precisely when it comes to translation, the extent to which a translator should intervene and interpret and manipulate rather than operate a purely linguistic transfer will be in accordance with beliefs about which of these frames most influence translation. So as a translator, when I translate the translator and then he, I would have to stop and think, actually, is any of these levels of culture involved in my decision to put this into, I don't know, let's say Italian, Korean, whatever language, Spanish? And then probably the answer is yes, I need to intervene. That's what he said. That's what he says there, David. He's my friend, David Katan. So he says, interpret, manipulate, rather than operate a purely linguistic transfer. So it's important for us translators to know that kind of, to have that kind of thing in our mind, that culture is an iceberg. When I translate from culture A to culture B, is really like transferring from one iceberg to another iceberg. Is more complicated than source to target only. And our role as translators is really to manipulate and interpret rather than simply operate the transfer. Translation scholars, the new thing I put there, they tend to focus on more hidden levels, while practitioners are more concerned with what is visible on the surface. I'm not sure if I agree with that entirely. He says basically that we theorists who write articles, we tend to focus more, whereas practitioners, they look at the surface of the, I don't know if that's true. I don't know, maybe you can tell me if you think this is true. I feel that everybody's looking at all surface, all levels. Let's look at Juliane House's conclusion. And I think I need to go a bit faster if I'm to meet my 1 hour. If the translator is to both meet the needs of the new addressees in their specific cultural setting and achieve an effect equivalent to the one the source text has had, she will have to take relevant cultural presuppositions in the two cultures into account. So this simply says, mind the two cultures, not just the two languages. And you can see that Juliane House, the translator, and she, yeah? These days we say the translator and they. So there is a kind of cultural filtering that we need to do. There is actually this interesting exercise, I'll go through it very fast, and a theoretical experiment, shall we call it, or research that was done. So someone was looking into German-English differences in communicative styles. So basically this says, how do English people communicate? How do German people communicate? Let's see if there are differences and similarities between the two. So who is more direct? Who is more indirect in the way they communicate? Yeah, so direct and indirect means really like addressing you just in your face somehow. Indirect is being a little bit more restrained, beating about the bush, somehow not really being too direct about. So who is more direct? Who is more indirect? Who is more thinking about themselves, the English or the Germans? Who is more thinking about what they actually say, the English or the Germans? Who is more explicit? Who is more implicit? So who actually says, this is what I want, as opposed to saying, can you please try to guess what I want? As in, like, if I'm warm here, if I'm hot, I'll say I'm actually a little bit hot, instead of saying, can you please open the window? That is the difference between explicitness and implicitness. And ad hoc formulation is really, I'm coming up with something which expresses what I really want to say, whereas use of verbal routines is I'm just following a routine because this is the way I need to go. I've been told I need to go when I want to say something. Again, you don't need to remember any of that. It's really about understanding what I'm trying to say. So these are the results of this research. Based on German-English intercultural discourse analysis, summary of findings. The German subjects, they tend to interact in ways that are more direct, more explicit, more self-referenced, and more content-oriented. They were also found to be less prone to resort to using verbal routines than Anglophone speakers. So this is really what they found through, I suppose, questionnaires and the rest. And I am emphasizing that we are dealing here with clients rather than dichotomies. I'll explain that, which reflect tendencies rather than categorical distinctions. So what I'm trying to say here is that it's not like black and white. That's what the word client means. It's not black and it's not either entirely direct or entirely indirect, entirely implicit or entirely explicit. It's just, you know, there's a climb from A to B, and someone is here, and someone is there, and someone is there, and someone is there. Yeah, so that's the one thing to say. The other thing to say is it's so much stereotypical. If you're English and you're in the room, or if you are German in the room, you may hate me now, because you may feel this is all, I'm not going to say a bad word, but this is rubbish. This is rubbish. Yeah. Yeah, and it is, frankly. But this is the stereotypes that count in the minds of people. And when, for instance, you are to work, let's say, on an advertisement of a product for the English people, you probably want to say, oh, the English do not actually want information directly thrown at them. Let me go a little bit around the topic so that I grasp their attention better. It's good for us translators, like it is for advertisers, to know these things, because it helps us in making translation decisions effectively. I want to refine that model going into, well, let's discuss some examples of intercultural communication. These are posters from films. I don't know if you know any of these films. Are more my age than it is your. Actually, it's not even my age. It's my parents' age. I was alive when Jaws was Steven Spielberg was released. One can think anything they want about this film. So Wong Kar-wai, for instance, the first one, is a Hong Kong director, and this, I think, on the left you have the Hong Kong. The American poster of the film, and on the right you have the Hong Kong poster of the film. Does that tell you something about Hong Kong people and American people? Maybe it does. Maybe the first one is more about eroticism and being lost, whereas the second one is, I don't know, the women as an elusive subject. I don't know. I like to talk about the second one, Jaws. And then you have the American poster and the Czech poster of the film, which was produced at the time where Czechoslovakia was still under the Soviet influence, was still a communist country. And so in the American poster of the film, you have this sense of threat, like a metaphysical threat to the American people, a metaphysical threat to the individual American who is swimming as you can see there at the sea. So you can see an individual threat to the man, individualist culture, and the Czech poster is very political. On the other hand, you can see a shark, which is at the place where exactly Cuba is, and it is actually threatening the whole of America, as you can see. So for me, you know, is it all intercultural? Well, it is intercultural communication. It is other things as well. Then you can say many other things about the Italian Job, how it's been advertised. This is an English film made, which was done in Italy. There was a remake in the early 2000s. In England, it was advertised as something European, continental, and Italian. You can see the flag there. In, I think it's Japanese, isn't it? The script there. In Japan, it was like an action film. So you can see again how culture affects things. Complicated. When preparing for this lecture, I also thought of that film, which in Italian is Perfetti Sconosciuti, and that means Perfect Strangers. And that was a remake for Korean. So which actually was a very nice film. And it's this one here. But these are the posters of the film in the various different languages that you can see it. I'm not saying this to be pleasant, but I do like the Korean poster more than the others. But can some people say how you feel about these posters? It's all about not about exactly the same film, but the same story, exactly the same story, adapted in Greek, in Spanish, in Korean, in Chinese, in Hungarian, Mexican Spanish, Russian, and Arabic. So I don't know if there is any input as to you might feel. Differently. And this is the original Italian. I do suppose that they show different images of the film. So these two are more mysterious to me. They all look at us as if they are, you know, they're enigmatic, if you know that word. They want to scare us maybe a little bit. I mean, the title of the film, I'm being told that in Korean it means intimate strangers. Do you agree? It's perfect. Okay, it's perfect strangers. So it's a paradox in the title. I feel that also this one conveys more the idea of them being strangers, actually. So they're individual. They are each one of them in their own little circle. So that's the reason it's all more colorful as well. Whereas, for instance, the Hungarian, it's more about the fun and the togetherness and the mess, I feel. I don't know, one can do a lot of interpretation of these things. I'm leaving this, you know, for now. It's not something we need to, you know, to stay for very long. But I think that it is interesting to start thinking of culture and what kind of culture each one of these may be. It's of course much more complex than a few terms. But let's go into another study. Actually, it's interesting for you guys as translators to see how the same title has been translated differently in different countries. Perfect Strangers, Stranger in My Pocket. That's the mobile. It has to do with a mobile, if you know this film. So Stranger in My Pocket, The Game, Intimate Strangers. You tell me it's not. Happy New Year. It's another one. This one is Happy New Year. Kill Mobile, Loud Connection, Unknown Subscriber, Blood Moon Party, The Returners, and Wild Game. It's the same idea. All this, I teach my students that it is translation. We may not think this is translation, but it is translation still. If I go now to the second part of my lecture, which is that it is not only about translating linguistic meanings, it's not only about written texts, but it is about culture. It's about translating cultures, which involves examining so-called cultural values from a comparative perspective. I've talked about cultural values, but I'm going to talk into a bit more detail. We will see some of these values based on the work of anthropologists Gerd Hofstede and Edward Hall again. I don't know if you know these people, or you've been taught these people a little in your classes. Maybe, you know, if you haven't, that's an opportunity now to just for you to get some ideas about how in anthropology they talk about cultures, and what they do also, Edward Hall and Hofstede, is to do reports for businesses. So there is a business, they want to expand in another locale, as we say, in another country. So they go to intercultural experts and they ask them and say, what should we be aware of when we go, let's say, from, I don't know, from Sweden to Korea? What should we be aware of? What are the differences in the culture? And I'll show you more comparative examples, but for now, it's just some terms. And so they have some metrics, which of course, there's a lot of theory. I'm going to give you the basis of the theory now. And they say, for instance, look, your culture, the Swedish culture, is a low context culture, whereas the Korean culture, I'm telling you now, it's a high context culture. Okay, so you need to be aware of that, dear business, dear company, because when you advertise your products, you cannot really go with the same narrative. You need to change your narrative for your product so that the Korean people will feel more attracted. So what's the difference between the two? High context cultures, those in which meaning tends to be implicit. That is inside the communicators, because they know what to expect based on their circumstance and on role and status relationships. Low context culture, they tend to place more meaning in the explicit code, that is in the words themselves. In this type of culture, people might assume that if a guest needs something, the guest will ask for it. So I'm your guest, and you might assume that, you know, if it's true that Korea is a high context culture, then you don't expect me to ask many questions. You expect me in a way to understand the Korean rules somehow and very kindly ask for something. I'm not saying about you people, you know, personally. I'm saying, you know, the general context. But on, you know, the other way around, going from a high context to a low context, it might be different. What this means essentially is that if you move around in a culture, let's say like Italian culture is a high context culture, everybody understands everything about other people from their dress code. They don't need to say anything. If you dress that way, that's who you are. Stereotypes, rubbish, all this is true. However, this is the perception in the culture. So if I want to make an advertisement and say something about rich people, I know how to dress them already. I know what car I give them to drive. In a local context culture, like the Swedish, it's not the case. You may be dressed any way you want. People will not make a lot of assumptions about you. They will not say that because, you know, you dress and you reveal a lot of your body, you have this character. No, at all. So high context, low context. And this is again another stereotypical classification, a cline, as I said, of high and low context cultures. So you can see where an Asian culture, here they give the Japanese and Chinese, probably the Korean culture is not very far from being considered a very high context culture. So the organization of life out there is such that it is quite tight. From the behavior of people every day, each member of the community is to understand a lot of things about the other member of the community. And any way of not behaving like that will be immediately marked. Yeah. Whereas in German, Swiss, Scandinavian cultures, they say it's not like that. I'm going to give you immediately a warning, a caution, These are only stereotypes. I genuinely do not believe it is true. I think this is stereotypes. And just to give you an example, even in Korea, I'm sure it's so much different between a village and Seoul. So, you know, what do you mean exactly when you say Japan, when you say Korean culture? So, and it's very different at home than it is from a company, than it is from a university. Different cultures, different micro cultures again. So, but these are, again, these are different, these are useful to know. These are only stereotypes. They can still be useful when making assumptions about what readers may think, feel. They're useful for activist purposes, such as translating with explicit purpose of subverting these stereotypes. These are some values that people like Hofstede and Hall examine, and then they say, oh, Japanese people are like that, or the Swedish people are like that. Power distance, masculinity, femininity, uncertainty avoidance, and individualism, collectivism. Okay, so power distance, I explained it already, is in a distance between me and you, very simple, you know, older professor, all right? What kind of power is being perceived between us? In England is smaller, in, let's say, India, bigger. Greece, where I come from, bigger, right? The same also apply within the family, members of the family. What is the say of the parents as opposed to the say of the children? Okay? How much, like a child, if they ask something, how much will the parents say, okay, maybe they know what they're talking about, as opposed to them feeling, oh, we know what they're talking about. Masculinity, femininity, this is really about not so much gender imbalance. They, Holland and Hofstede, they have that idea. I don't agree really with that, but I'm telling you because it's their idea, that there are male culture, the cultures that are more male in the sense that they place value in being aggressive, in being forward. So there are cultures, they say, that are like the masculine behavior, confrontational, okay? And there are other cultures which tend to be more caring, which tend to be more democratic, which tend to be more affectionate, yeah? I don't believe it's true again. So I'm telling you all this time things that I don't believe they're true, but they are influential and they're useful for translators to know. Even if you don't think, this is the weakest category, if you ask me, I don't think there are cultures that are necessarily masculine or feminine. Maybe what they say is true, but maybe they need to find different names for that. But in any case, that's what they say. Uncertainty avoidance, that's also interesting, but it's really difficult the way they put it. That means how willing you are to take risks as a culture, how willing you are to go a step into the unknown as a culture, right? So uncertainty avoidance cultures are those that are not willing to take risks. They don't want to change the status quo. So I come from a culture now, right now, so I'm Greek, but I live in the UK. So the UK, suddenly they say, we will vote for Brexit. Yeah, for me, that's a willingness to take risks. Do I agree? Not at all. I'm very unhappy that my country decided to leave the European Union. But it's a risk. It's a country that said, we are ready for a step into the unknown, right? So the British culture is very low in uncertainty avoidance because they do not avoid uncertainty. They embrace uncertainty. And a lot of the time, it's a good thing for a culture to be bold, to go into the unknown, like Star Trek, if you know what I mean. So yeah, and the last category is individualism, collectivism. It's one of the strongest categories, and the way it does apply in many ways. Think of a culture like American culture is all about the individual. It's in their constitution. It's about the happiness and the prosperity of the individual American, not the community. So every individual American are taught in school, sorry if you're American, and but if you disagree, do tell me, are taught in school that it's all about the self, it's all about themselves. right? It's not necessarily about the ego. It's about the individual happiness. There are other cultures, like the Chinese culture, I think is the highest, but maybe this one too, we'll see in a minute, which are very collectivistic, which people are taught that their place in the community is the most important thing. You, which I like, frankly, if it is true. You are you, of course you are you, but your value comes from your community. It doesn't come from you specifically. So this distinction is also important. Power distance, masculinity, femininity, uncertainty avoidance, individualism, collectivism. These are the definitions that they give. I'm going to just read it because I've explained all that. It refers power distance to whether people in a culture tend to value status difference and see it as appropriate. Cultures with high power distance are characterized by deference to superiors, managers, and status elites. More autocratic governments, less equality. I'm going to make this available to you to read it at home if you want. Masculinity, femininity. It refers to male and female emotional values. In work goals, masculine cultures privilege directness, efficiency, competition, and goal orientation. And feminine cultures privilege service, cooperation, modesty, and caring for others. Uncertainty avoidance pertains to the overall desire for structure and predictability in a culture. High uncertainty avoidance is associated with distrusting anything strange. Low avoidance of uncertainty suggests that the culture is flexible in terms of violation of expectations. This is the most difficult to understand. Don't worry. It's basically what I told you. It's how willing or unwilling a culture is to take risks. Individualism, collectivism refers to the links between the person and her or his social network. In more collective societies, decisions will be made with a group in mind. In more individualistic cultures, people tend to make decisions based upon personal interest and advancement. Let's now go to, well, this is really a figure which shows, for instance, how different cultures are here. You don't have, again, Korea here, but let's say, for instance, a country like India, you can see from individualism to collectivism is quite, is collectivistic, not terribly collectivistic like Hong Kong or Venezuela, but quite, and from low to power distance is quite power distance. So India is more higher power distance and collectivist country. Japan is similar to India, but less so on both accounts. Denmark, on the other hand, is very individualistic and very low power. That's what Hofstede says. Let's look about Korea here, if this works. Hopefully it will. If it doesn't, you need to come and help me. Yeah. Maybe you can just copy it, you know, and then go to the. Ah, great. Great, thank you so much. Shall I accept or decline? Shall I accept or decline? Decline. Accept. Thank you so much. So anyway, you can do that yourselves and go here, and I find it a lot of fun. Maybe some people find that's a bit offensive, I don't know. And you select countries, and then we have, of course, Korea. So it's, I think it's under South Korea, but let's see, Korea, South Korea, South Korea. So that's the values of the country. So over here I have one category called long-term orientation. So anyway, that's where the country stands in terms of the Hofstede insights. There is quite a lot of power distance in Korea. there is low level of individualism, as I predicted. It's quite a, no, it's not a masculine, it's rather more of a feminine culture than a masculine culture. That doesn't mean that men don't have the upper hand. It means that the culture is more caring than it is competitive. There is quite an impressively high level of unwillingness to take risks. I don't know if you people agree, I wouldn't know. Long-term orientation is when the culture is planning ahead. I didn't explain that. How willing the culture is to invest in the future. That's what it means here, to invest in the future. And you have 100 over 100. I mean, Korean subject. And indulgence, we'll check in a minute what it means. I think it's the opposite of long-term. What do you think as Korean people or people who know Korean culture? Does that make you angry, or does that make you say, probably it's true? Probably true. Do you want me to compare with another culture for fun? I can do that. So just pull another country here. To say. Sorry? European country. Denmark? Okay. Yeah, oh, yeah, there it is. So Denmark, it is very different, yeah. So you can see it's actually different on every single account. So power distance in Denmark, it's the opposite. So actually power distance, yeah, 18 means there is a big power distance, I suppose, here. And I don't know, yeah, South Korea is blue, Denmark is red here, okay. So South Korea, there is low power distance. So South Korea is high power distance. Sorry, that's my jet lag now speaking. South Korea is high power distance, whereas Denmark is low. Individualism is low in Korea, very high in Denmark. Masculinity is slightly higher in Korea and quite low in Denmark. Korea is quite unwilling to take risks, whereas Denmark is willing to take risks. Korea is investing in the future, whereas Denmark isn't, and the opposite with indulgence. I think that if you want to go to a particular country, you can go, we're not going to do it now, but do it at home because it's fun to see how people are looking at your country, whatever your country is, and then they explain these dimensions, as they call them, and then they say, okay, if Korea has 18 for individualism, South Korea with a score of 18 is considered a collectivistic society. This is manifest in a close long-term commitment to the member group, be that a family, extended family, or extended relationships. Loyalty in a collectivistic culture is paramount and overrides most other societal rules and regulations. The society fosters strong relationships, and the rest. You can read it at home. I find it infinitely fascinating to read about these values and the way countries are perceived. It looks to me that I might not have time actually to do my clip. We'll see how this is going to go. But going back to my examples, yeah. Thank you so much. Careful. I wanted to show you a few things about is there anything? Oh, let's see. Thank you so much. So in talking about advertisement translation, I was thinking to talk to you about the brand name and all that, but I'm not going to stay there now because of time. I just want to connect directly to what I was saying before, and this is about Is that okay about the filming? Because I think, yeah, it's good, yeah? All right, so this is, what I wanted to show you here is about how this applies. I shouldn't be too far from the microphone. How this applies, how this cultural difference values apply in advertising. So on the left, you have the IKEA catalog in the US. On the right, you have the IKEA catalog in Saudi Arabia. Do people know what IKEA is? Everybody knows, yeah, of course. We are in a global world. Do you notice any difference? There's no women, yeah? So that means effectively that when the Arab people took the UK catalog and they translated it into their own language for IKEA in Saudi Arabia, they thought that our culture really does not have room for a woman in the bathroom. I can show a woman, but not in her pajamas and not in the bathroom, because I'm not allowed to say bad things about any country, so I won't. But at this point, that's really the result here. So, however, you know, did the translator do their job? Probably they did their job, because the purpose was for IKEA to sell without insulting people. Would the translator do their job better if they took a little bit of a risk? Maybe, I don't know, leaving the woman there, but maybe, I don't know, doing something else? I don't know. We translators have a margin for affecting change. And the reason is because things are changing anyway. To the better, towards the worse, we don't know. But in that war of change, we play a role. And maybe the role of the translator here was maybe to sit in the room and discuss. So anyway, here you have a child which is almost ready to fall off their chair because there is no one to protect it. But it's a boy, and in Saudi Arabia, it's fine. So that's my example for transcreation purposes. I do not really, I have a choice now. Shall I go for the transcreation or the clip? What shall I be doing? Shall I do audiovisual translation? Yeah. So I'm going to show you therefore an example with audiovisual translation, which is really from that film called Chicken Run. And the purpose of that, thank you for your readiness. The purpose is, I'll be talking as you are doing this. The purpose of that is to see whether there is room for us to implement that knowledge also in subtitling. All right. There may be other examples that may think are better than that. For instance, when you translate politeness from one language into another, then maybe there is probably more room to, thank you very much. There is more room to implement intercultural difference. So translating politeness, imagine from, let's say, Korean into English, or from English into Korean. So you have a discussion that takes place between in English, you want to translate it into Korean, and there is power difference between the two speakers. Yeah, I couldn't find an example really to bring to you today, but then you may think actually in Korea, power distance between speakers is more important. So in my translation, in my subtitles, I need to take into account power distance. This is slightly different, and I want you to watch this clip from Chicken Run. So if you don't know what this film is about, it's an animation, stop animation film from 2000, I think it is, from 2000. And this is really about this chicken that they lived all together in an English farm, and they hear one day that this lady who owns them is prepared to turn them into chicken pies, right? So they need a plan to leave the coop, so to leave their farm, yeah? And they don't know, of course, how to do that because chicken cannot fly. So one day you have this male chicken, this rooster, who lands into the chicken run Chicken Run is all together. It's called the Chicken Run, yeah? From the sky. And that's because he works in a circus, and then there was a cannonball who, you know, using that he landed there. But they think that he can teach them how to fly. Okay, and then he takes the opportunity, and then he says, okay, I'll teach you how to fly if you treat me well, right? So we're going to see a scene from the film. It's a little bit difficult scene to understand, but let's see how it goes. Yeah. Can I make it big, this one, or is it big enough? Maybe it's big enough, huh? Maybe it's big enough.
Ever wonder what chickens do when you're not looking?
Sorry, that's not the right one, I'm afraid. There was a clip actually that I had, like a separate clip. Yeah. Because this is the trailer, I don't want the trailer. So if you go to there, it's, okay. Yeah.
And the pig says to the horse, hey. And the pig says to the horse, hey, fella, why the long face? Cocktail!
Just to say what's happening here. So he is being treated like a hero. Yeah, because he landed there, he says, I'll teach you how to fly. And then you have all the chicken treating him like a special person. Yeah, so he's enjoying, obviously, the attention. What happens here is interesting. And then I'll just let the video go. But from a translation perspective, I want you to think about that. It's not cultural related, it's language related, but you are a translator, so it's interesting. So what happens is, so he takes a feather from his tail, he puts it in his drink. So he's a cock, so he's a rooster. He takes a feather, whatever feather, he puts it there, and he says,
Cocktail!
So I want you to think how you would translate that. Well, that's a, you know, we can talk about that later. But so this girl is going to give him a hard time.
So, anyway, remember those flying tips tomorrow. They're very important, and keep thinking those flighty thoughts.
Yeah.
They're swell chicks, they really are. Hey, look at what Babs made me. A beak warmer. Isn't that the cutest? And that bunny. She really packs a punch. Is there a problem here?
Have we flown over that fence?
Not quite.
Then there's a problem.
Hey, good things come to those who wait, dollface.
Ginger! Okay, how long did it take you?
To do what?
To learn how to fly.
Apples and oranges, baby doll. I'm gifted. They're not. You can't compare the two, okay? Point is, these things take time.
Which we are rapidly running out of, and we haven't even lifted off the ground. Why?
Thrust.
What?
I went over my calculations, Hen, and I figured the key element we're missing is thrust.
I didn't get a word of that.
Thrust! I've had birds like ducks and geese when they take off. What do they have? Thrust!
I swear she ain't using real words.
Oh, she said we need more thrust.
Oh, thrust. Well, of course we need thrust. Thrust and flying are like this. That's flying and that's thrust.
Will you excuse us? Bye.
The wing, the wing, the wing.
If we don't see some results by tomorrow, the deal is off, and you're on your own. No more hiding. The farmers will find you, and it's back to the circus, flyboy.
You know, you're the first chick I ever met with the shell still on. Sleep tight, angel face. The rock's on the case.
Ginger!
If you feel disappointed because it's such a difficult excerpt, you're not alone. It's very, very difficult to know what it says, to understand what it is about, and to, I think we're gonna watch it again. Is it possible to watch this together with a Word file on the end? So to have both the video and the Word file, or is it difficult? Difficult. Yeah. In the meantime, do we have any native speakers in the room? Native English speakers?
Looking.
No, native English speaker. Okay. Do you feel you understood everything? Like 70%. So that goes to show, you know, how difficult it is for everyone. But let's watch it another time, because the cocktail joke was very difficult. And I want us to see the last scene again before we discuss the subtitling of it. That's not the one again. I can do it myself. Oh, no, you need to do it, I suppose. So I need to go here. Oh, thank you.
And the pig says to the horse, "Hey, fella, why the long face?" Cocktail! Huh? So, anyway, remember those flying tips tomorrow. They're very important, and keep thinking those flighty thoughts.
So effectively, she looked at him and he thought, what am I doing here? She's going to tell me off. So he's embarrassed.
Yeah. They're swell chicks. They really are. Hey, look at what Babs made me. A beak warmer. Isn't that the cutest? And that bunty. She really packs a punch. Is there a problem here?
Have we flown over that fence?
Have we flown over that fence? So she starts to suspect that he's really not someone who can teach them how to.
Not quite.
Then there's a problem.
Hey, good things come to those who wait, Dollface.
Ginger! Okay, how long did it take you
To do what?
to learn how to fly?
Apples and oranges, baby doll. I'm gifted. They're not. You can't compare the two, okay? Point is, these things take time.
Which we are rapidly running out of, and we haven't even lifted off the ground. Why?
Thrust.
What?
I went over my calculations, Hen, and I figured the key element we're missing is thrust.
I didn't get a word of that.
So you can see, I didn't get a word of that. So it is in the plot that one of the characters does not understand what the other character is saying.
Thrust! I've had birds like ducks and geese when they take off. What do they have? Thrust!
I swear she ain't using real words.
I swear she's not using real words.
Oh.
But the girl knows what she's saying.
She said we need more thrust.
Oh!
She said we need more thrust. Thrust is, how do you explain thrust? Is really a push so that we can start flying.
Thrust? Well, of course we need thrust. Thrust and flying are like this. That's flying and that's thrust.
So as not to lose time, let's discuss this expert. And I want to do some input from you guys. If you can tell me, are these all people from the same culture? Few of them are from different countries. Oh, sorry, I mean in the video.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So just to make myself clear, are the people in the video from the same culture? Yeah or no? I'm telling you they are not. Yeah, so give me some more. Anything. Basically, just to tell you that before I left my country and went to England, if I was in Greece, that is, in your age, and I was shown this, I would think that they all speak English. This is an English film. They're all English to me, right? So if you think, yes, it's logical. I'm telling you they are not, though. They're from 3 different cultures. So, and I know from the accent. Shall I play this a little bit so you can pay attention to the accent a little?
And keep thinking those flighty thoughts.
Yeah.
They're swell chicks. They really are. Hey, look at what Babs made me. A beak warmer. Isn't that the cutest? And that bunty. She really packs a punch. Is there a problem here?
Have we flown over that fence?
Not quite.
Then there's a problem.
Hey, good things come to those who wait, Dollface.
Ginger! Okay, how long did it take you
To do what?
to learn how to fly?
Apples and oranges, baby doll. I'm gifted. They're not. You can't compare the two, okay? Point is, these things take time.
Which we are rapidly running out of, and we haven't even lifted off the ground. Why?
Thrust.
What?
I went over my calculations, Hen, and I figured the key element we're missing is thrust.
So, any ideas? The rooster is American. How about this girl? British, very British. This is accentuated. The way she speaks, she's like in an old school English girl. Not British, but English. And how about this
Take
crazy mechanic?
time.
Which we are rapidly running out of, and we haven't even lifted off the ground. Why?
Thrust.
What?
I went over my calculations, Hen, and I figured the key element we're missing is thrust.
No, but good try. Sorry? African, no. Scottish, yeah. So they're all native speakers, but she's Scottish. So it's typical Scottish accent. Who would have thought, you know, if I was, as I said, you know, if I didn't know the English speaking culture, I wouldn't have thought. I would have thought it's my problem for not understanding English as I should. But here you have the American guy saying, I just don't get a word of that. Well, she speaks very fast, but that's one thing. Another thing is that her accent is very strongly Scottish, right? So, so we have many problems here in terms of subtitling this particular excerpt. And I'm not gonna spend a lot of time now discussing how to do this, unless someone, because it's quite late, unless someone wants to say, you know, that's how I would do it, or a way of doing it would be that. I mean, I'm doing this lecture every year with my students, my master students. So if someone would want to say, how would it treat it really in subtitles? This, can I say that one of them is Scottish, or actually the rooster is British? Let's see. Oh, can I have your help again, please? Yeah, because I need now to open a Word file from here, a Word file. So this one, yeah. So I want to show you what she says. Yeah. I'm not going to use Family Guy, if you know it. Thank you. So what she says here is, you'll be surprised to know, I went over my calculations and I figure the key element you're missing here is thrust. Who would have thought? Did you get it, the native speaker? Half of it, 70%. Yeah, I know. But imagine, this is really not necessarily something that people are supposed to understand. If you go to watch the film, or let's say it's a mother and they take their daughter, because it's a kid's film, yeah, but it's very interesting for the mother as well. And they go to the cinema, the kid is not gonna, unless they're Scottish themselves, they are not gonna understand the language. And then he said, I didn't get the word of that. Thrust, other birds, like ducks and geese, when they take off, what they have, thrust. So just again, to make it very quick. And actually, I have here the English subtitles, sorry, how this was subtitled in English. I went over my calculations. What we are missing is thrust. So all of that was made very, very small. And there is no indication of where this person is from. So when you do this, let's say into Greek, into Italian, into other languages, there is no indication where this is from. And I found the Korean subtitles for you, but you need to tell me, you need to stop me when you see the actual dialogue, because I don't know where it is. It must be somewhere here. Are you getting it somewhere? Yeah? 4 or 6, yeah? So this one means thrust. Oh, okay. Oh, I see. So how do you reckon? Are these good subtitles? Are these interesting subtitles? Is there any indication of who is American? No. In subtitling, we cannot subtitle dialect. So maybe take this. There is no way, unless we intervene and they say Scottish accent or British accent, which for a children's film, they don't care, the kids. You don't do this for them. They are there to laugh. So that's something that's lost in the film. Very quickly, just to say seriously how this was treated professionally, they were told, I didn't subtitle this film, but I find very interesting. They say, forget about the accent, forget about where they are from. In this particular scene, we have to justify why one of the characters does not understand the other character. That's the problem. And so you have to give some indication that she speaks in a very scientific jargon, like an engineer who says, you know, something weird. And then the other character, so the rooster, she will say something, I don't know what she's talking about, as opposed to, I don't know what language this is, right? So I don't know if the Korean is no. So they didn't really give that. So that's your job, you young subtitlers, do it better. I will finish my lecture by, why don't I finish like that? By just looking at cocktail. You tell me how cocktail was done. I'm sorry. So do I need to go a little bit further down? Maybe it's so bad that you don't even get. So let's see what it says before that, because I remember it was at the beginning. Oh, actually, it's the first. Oh no! After this, the joke with the horse. Oh, look, 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 and then oh, cocktail. So it's really early on. So it should be somewhere here or some. A party. So look at this party. What do you think about that translation? No? Then there's no joke. There's just fun, eh? There's just like, let's all have a party. But then think of that poor subtitler. What do you do with that joke? Because it's what we call a complex joke, is both linguistic and visual. If you look, I don't know if you're familiar with a book by Jorge Diacintas and Aline Remael, which is called Audiovisual Translation Subtitling. So when they talk about humor, they have a category which it's called complex jokes. And this is a complex joke. It's both visual and linguistic. So in Greek, it was rendered cock cooked with wine, something like that. But it's not good because they hear cocktail. So it's a very difficult situation. So everybody, thank you very much for your patience. It took a little bit longer, but I'm here for questions if there are more, anything to ask. Thank you very much. Don't be shy. I know I never asked questions when I was a student myself. But I know there are some bursting questions in the audience, so thank you. Yeah. Just maybe you repeat also for me to hear it better.
You mentioned that the accents weren't translated because it's a movie for children and it's not important for children. So if it was a movie for adults, would they probably have used a different translation strategy?
That's an excellent question. So the question, if I understand it, is accents altogether unimportant for subtitling, or do we actually subtitle them sometimes? Of course, a lot of the time we have to subtitle them because accents always convey a lot of information. So it could be cultural difference, but a lot of time we associate values with accents. So if an accent that comes from the north or the south, we associate it with elements like authenticity, or someone is from the provinces. So we associate character with accents sometimes. So in the case of Britain, Scottishness is valued as an element of authenticity. Sometimes it's used also in advertising because it inspires trust. When someone speaks to you with a Scottish accent, they're telling you the truth. And another stereotype, obviously. So how do we subtitle the accent? It's difficult, obviously, to do it because the characteristics of the accent are not often transferred into another language. How do you do it phonetically? It's bizarre to subtitle like that. If you transpose it in a different country, so let's say, as I say, you have a Korean accent in a Korean television series, and then you want to do it in British, does it make any sense to translate it in a way that conveys Scotland? It's very confusing because you have Korean people in front of you very clearly, you hear them speaking Korean, then to kind of have indications in the subtitle that this is actually a Scottish accent, where is this coming from? So very difficult. You can do it sometimes with through the lexicon, through the uses of lexis. So instead of actually using phonetically something that indicates accent, you probably can use a few words that are associated with not so much a regional register, but what we could call a societal register. So someone who comes from a slightly different social class. So something like that, something that conveys difference from the norm. That is going to be decided by the case, I suppose. It's more difficult with jokes and humor, obviously. But yeah, accents is something very difficult. There are films that are based on the use of accents. There's a very famous French film called Bienvenue chez les Ch'tis. Les Ch'tis in France, if you're familiar with France, are a community of people who speak French in a very weird way. And that was a huge hit in France. Now this was translated, subtitled into English. In that case, they chose a regional English accent. And it was decided from the start, the audience have to get used to it. This is the way we convey difference. But yeah, it's a very difficult problem, accent, it's true. Yeah, it's here, yeah.
Professor, I want to ask you a question. It's very simply. And the question is, you talked about the several factors influencing intercultural communication, especially for artificial intelligence. And my question is, do you think the translation could be deployed as early as possible? For example, according to the critical period hypothesis of the children learning the second language or the translation of the second language. So do you think the translation can be manipulated as early as possible, especially for children?
You mean for pedagogical purposes? Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not very much versed into the pedagogy, or actually translation is a pedagogical tool, but I know a little about learning foreign language through the use of translation. So maybe I can answer that question, and maybe I can speculate about what you asked me. But I feel that, so for a long time, translation was considered to be the wrong approach in learning language. So you were supposed to, I don't know, maybe you're an expert in that, I don't know. But But I know that you were supposed to learn, let's say, a foreign language like Korean. You should be exposed, you should be immersed in that linguistic and cultural environment, at least linguistic environment. You do, let's say, 2 hours a week. 2 hours a week you do Korean, you just do Korean. No other language is involved in these 2 hours. But that, I think, has been abandoned now. And the value of integrating translation and specifically films and subtitling has been recognized at various stages of learning a language. So now the common belief is, I think, that you have to integrate translation, especially in the early stages. You have to integrate subtitling, not only in terms of passive exposure to subtitled content, but also creatively, children or adults, learners, doing subtitling. So there are specific software, there are specific types of software which are specifically for learners, where you just play with the video. And one of the techniques, which actually I heard in a conference very recently, is to allow the kids, specifically children, to do anything they want. So you give them that video and you tell them, don't worry if you do not understand what they're saying, just write what they might be saying in subtitling. And that's a funny way, if someone is interested in teaching English as foreign language or any language, it's an interesting way of teaching, because the kids, they stay with the film very, very closely. If any time you have subtitled, you really become one with the film. You learn every single frame of the film. So yeah. Now, early on, in terms of the children, yeah, probably that's also my answer. Yeah, an early exposure to subtitling and translation, perhaps, but not really demanding too much of a learner. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the question.
I have a question. Actually, it's about transcreation.
Good.
I'm sorry if this doesn't make sense, because the theory itself is still not very clear to me. Transcreation itself is pretty new theory, right? So I read a lot about transcreation being used in terms of marketing and advertising, but if I can hear your opinion about the use of transcreation in audiovisual translation, especially in songs translations.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, because a major part of song translation requires some creative writing as well. So how much and how do we balance between the translation portion of it and also the creation portion of it?
I'm very happy that you asked that question, because my current area of research is translation and creativity. So I'm looking into this specific area, not so much the translation of songs, which is very, very creative in itself, but mostly in creative subtitling. Creative subtitling being using all the technical possibilities of subtitles to convey the film, to be creative while you are translating a film. So subtitles all over the place, of course, artfully and knowingly, colors, fonts, a lot of different approaches to subtitling, so that you really localize it, or you care about the film in a more creative way. But to go to your question, just to clarify that transcreation is mostly about like advertising copy. So whereas you will hear translation agencies saying we offer transcreation, and then it can be anything, it's because transcreation is more buzzy word when you are a client and they are telling you, oh, we are not going to translate we are going to transcreate it, so you need to pay us more. Effectively, that's what it is, the idea. But transcreation is mostly advertising and promotional material, the way I see it. I understand there is not a lot of clarity around that topic. However, I'm very happy for the concept to be expanded to cover other creative uses of translation, such as the translation of songs. Again, the translation of songs, very good question, as I said. How do you approach that? Is it really about the music? Is it really about the target audience? Is it like, what is the first concern? What is a priority of concerns as you approach the task. Is it really about promoting the plot in a musical, for instance? Is it really about, let's say, if you take a Spanish Latin American hit and you want to translate it into English, which is a type of song translation that takes place a lot. So Latin American music, pop music, and then taken by American singers, or is it really adapting it totally to the persona and the creative profile of the singer? So all these factors might play a role in decisions around song translation. I'm not an expert there as well, but there is actually an article which ranks, I don't remember now, I think Peter Lowe is the person who wrote it, which ranks 5 factors that count in the translation of songs. And one of them is specific to song, and it's called singability. I don't know if you've heard about that. You had, yeah. So singability is a factor as to, okay, I've got the translation of the song. Can I take the translation and sing it? So if I can do that, that's something that is very specific as a strategy for the translation of songs. I think you're ready to stop me there. Yeah.
I think we are